Before there were kings or kingdoms, before even the concept of history, there was Ethiopia. This isn't just a country. It's where our story begins, right here in the Great Rift Valley, the womb of humanity. If you've ever wondered where we all come from, welcome home. Millions of years ago, the land we call Ethiopia was alive. Tectonic plates shifting, volcanoes reshaping the earth. This dramatic landscape wasn't chaos, it was creation. The Great Rift Valley split open, and inside it, evolution found a playground. This is where nature started its greatest experiment. Us. She stood just 4 feet tall, walked on 2 legs, had grasping feet. Her name? Ardi, short for Ardipithecus ramidus. Discovered in Ethiopia's Afar region, she lived 4.4 million years ago. Not quite human, not quite ape, but definitely part of our family. Fast forward to 3.2 million years ago. Another ancestor walked these lands, Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis. Discovered in 1974, she changed everything we thought we knew. Lucy could walk upright, a major evolutionary leap, and she did it right here in Ethiopia. From Ethiopia, they spread wave after wave of migration. Homo sapiens emerged around 300,000 years ago and slowly moved across Africa, then beyond, Asia, Europe, the Americas. But remember, their footprints began in the ancient soils of Ethiopia. For tens of thousands of years, early Ethiopians hunted, gathered, and adapted. They knew the land, the animals, the seasons. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving in harmony with nature. This was human resilience, long before the first city. Even before temples or pyramids, early humans believed. Ethiopia is home to some of the earliest symbolic artifacts, signs of ritual and meaning. Maybe they worship nature, ancestors, or the stars. Before there was religion, there was wonder. By 10,000 BC, the seeds of civilization were just beginning. But Ethiopia had already hosted millions of years of human evolution. This land isn't just old, it's ancient. And before time had a name, it already had a story, and it began right here. Early Ethiopians roam in small bands, hunting wild gazelles, gathering berries and roots. This is the final age of pure hunter-gatherers. 10,000 BC, the world is changing. Ice Age glaciers are retreating. And here, in the highlands of Ethiopia, the story of human settlement begins. The African humid period begins. Rainfall increases, lakes expand, and Ethiopia bursts with life. With stable seasons and flowing rivers, people begin to stay. They build seasonal camps, tiny roots of the first villages. Goats and cattle begin living closer to humans, no longer wild. They're becoming domesticated. Before civilization, there was stewardship. Before the future, there were stories like this. Stone walls become sacred canvases. painted hands, dancing animals, and ancient signs whisper across time, speaking without words, echoing the soul of a people. As darkness falls and the world holds its breath, they lift their eyes to the stars. In the silence of night, the sky becomes more than light. It becomes their map, their story, their first myth written in stardust. By 5000 BC, Ethiopia is no longer just a wild and untamed land. It is becoming home, shaped by memory, rooted in spirit, and forged through the quiet strength of survival. Every fire lit, every grain ground, every star watched above becomes part of a legacy still unfolding. High in the Ethiopian highlands, a new power emerged, Aksum, not just a kingdom, an empire. Forged in the mountains, fueled by trade, faith, and ambition, from ivory to incense, gold to ideas, it connected worlds. It built monuments that defied time and a legacy that reached beyond Africa. Aksum would soon shake the world and leave echoes. Greeks called it the land of giants. Towering obelisks rise, catching the sun like ancient sentinels. A lone figure walks below, dwarfed by stone carved with impossible precision. Tools of a forgotten craft rest at the base, silent but telling. Intricate carvings emerge in shadow and light, whispering lost stories. As the sun sets behind the field of stele, time seems to fold. Nature reclaims the fallen, but their mystery endures. Aksum wasn't isolated. It traded with Rome, India, even China. Gold, ivory, spices, all flowed through its markets. Aksum was Africa's ancient economic superpower. Adulis, Aksum's beating heart on the Red Sea, a thriving port, alive with the clang of trade, sails snapping in the wind, and voices from every corner of the ancient world. Gold, ivory, spices, riches flowed like tides. If Aksum was a lion, then Adulis was its roar, echoing across empires. Ezana, once a child king, later a conqueror. He led Aksum to glory, crushed Nubia, and etched his triumphs in stone. A ruler, a visionary, a name carved into history, still spoken 1,700 years on. Under Ezana, Aksum became one of the first Christian empires. Before Rome, before Byzantium, the cross replaced the crescent, and history changed forever. Once a Syrian slave, Frumentius rose to become a spiritual guide of a nation. Through courage and conviction, he introduced Christianity to Aksum, converting a kingdom and baptizing an empire. He didn't just spread faith, he helped shape the very soul and destiny of Aksum. Aksum didn't just conquer lands, it carved a language into history. Ge'ez, the sacred script, was more than words. It was a symbol of power, culture, and divine purpose. Still alive today in liturgy, Ge'ez echoes through time, a language of kings, of faith, and enduring legacy. Aksum minted its own coins, gold, silver, and bronze, etched with the faces of kings and crosses that gleamed in the sun. These weren't just currency. They were statements of sovereignty, trade, and belief. Each coin was proof of power, proof of pride and a legacy that traveled across empires. A clash of titans. Aksum against the mighty Kingdom of Kush, two ancient African giants, each rich in culture, power, and ambition. Their struggle echoed across deserts and rivers. In the end, only one endured. Kush fell into history, and Aksum rose to shape the future. In ancient Aksum, stone obelisks rise above royal tombs. Flowers rest at their base. Carvings flicker in torchlight. Beneath them, hidden chambers hold the dead. Lightning cracks. Stars spin overhead. These towers stand silent, watchers of a lost kingdom. Legend ties Aksum to the Queen of Sheba, wise and powerful. From her union with Solomon came Menelik I. He left Jerusalem, bringing the Ark to Ethiopia. A trail of incense links two ancient worlds. Myth? Maybe, but in Ethiopia, it's memory. Before Christianity, the gods of Aksum ruled. Sun and moon symbols marked sacred altars. Priests performed rituals in groves, offering incense and sacrifice. At temples and springs, people gave grain, milk, and devotion. It was a time of celestial worship, an empire guided by stars and spirits. Ivory, white gold of the ancient world. From Aksum's highlands, tusks journeyed far, building thrones in Rome and temples in India. Elephants and oxen carved trade routes through mountains. In palaces and markets, ivory met gold, spice, and legend. Without mortar, without machines, Aksumite builders shaped the impossible, stone blocks aligned with perfect precision. Towers rose on mountain edges, carved from the earth itself. Their hands, ropes, and vision created wonders that still defy time. Across the Red Sea, Arabia watched with unease. Aksum was no mere neighbor. It was a rising giant. Rumors spread in councils. Scrolls spoke of power. Warships stirred the waves. And fear, because sometimes giants cross oceans. Aksum invaded Yemen, its armies crashing onto Arabian shores. The empire no longer stopped at Africa's edge. Fortresses fell, banners rose, and generals claimed new lands. Aksum's reach was vast, its grip unshakable. As Islam rose, Aksum offered refuge to the Prophet's followers. But the world shifted. New faith, new roots, new powers. Trade slipped away like tides, and the empire began to fade. Even giants can feel the ground shake beneath them. By the 8th century, Aksum's light began to fade. Temples crumbled, ports fell silent, and cities turned to stone. Winds swept through empty streets, echoes of a vanished empire. But even in shadow, its soul endured, etched in time, not forgotten. Aksum vanished, but it was never lost. Its faith shaped Ethiopia's heart. Its language still whispers in prayer. The kingdom fell, yet left a legacy of light. From ancient stones to modern souls, its crown became a torch. At dawn, Aksumite ships cut through the Red Sea. Armored cavalry storms Arabian sands, swift and unstoppable. Crossbow bolts slice through the air under the desert sun. Banners clash. Empires collide. The Aksumite flag rises high over the Himyarite fortress. Victory echoes in royal decree. Aksum has claimed another chapter in history. Aksumite boats glide along the Nile, flanked by spear-armed guards. In the dense jungle, shield walls hold fast against surprise attacks. Flaming arrows arc across the river, lighting the way to conquest. At a distant outpost, a general surveys his prize. Captured banners return to Aksum, followed by celebration. Dancers, drums, and the roar of a proud people. Tensions rise as Roman envoys cross into Aksumite land. In the rugged highlands, border clashes erupt. Roman formations against Aksum's swift black cavalry. Yet, even as swords flash, diplomacy lingers. A scroll is torn, but peace is not lost. Night falls on a fragile ceasefire, with warriors on both sides exchanging glances of hard-won respect. Watchtowers blaze from coast to coast. An enemy fleet looms through morning fog. Flares light up the sea as defenses ignite. Walls hold firm as arrows fly. From the chaos, a survivor is pulled from the smoke. The Red Sea map glows anew. Its trade routes secured, its gates guarded by the might of Aksum. In the heart of Aksum, unrest brews. Rebels burn banners in the square. Elite guards close in through tight streets, torches lighting the flame-lit night. A king's decree echoes in silence, but mercy follows strength. Rebels lay down arms. A festival of unity sweeps the capital as torches guide a healed people through the sacred Stela fields. In the silence of the highland night, a child of destiny sleeps beneath the stars. The heavens open, not with thunder, but with light. Angels descend in whispers, bearing a message written not in ink, but in eternity. You are chosen, Gebra Meska Lalibela. Your kingdom shall be carved not in gold, but in stone and faith. Atop the mountains of Lasta, young Lalibela lifts his eyes to the sky. A light more radiant than the sun pierces the clouds, revealing churches suspended in the heavens, not built by hands, but shaped by the will of God. A holy city awaits him, carved from the bones of the earth. In the silence of stone walls and candlelit halls, whispers travel faster than swords. Secret letters pass from hand to trembling hand, each one a pledge, a warning, a call to war. Some carry the seal of the Zagwe, defenders of the present throne. Others bear the Lion of Solomon, sworn to restore the ancient bloodline. In monasteries once united by prayer, a hidden war brews, where ink becomes weapon and parchment carries prophecy. King Lalibela, chosen by vision, sought more than a crown. He sought a sign from heaven. Across deserts and seas, his envoy rode to Alexandria, bearing a scroll sealed in prayer. There, the Coptic patriarch responded, not with words, but with a sacred relic, a fragment of the holy, a symbol of divine approval. They came from the south, Solomonic rebels, sons of a forgotten crown, marching beneath ancient banners. Behind them, monasteries burn. Monks flee with holy books clutched to their chests, smoke rising like incense to the heavens. But in the highlands, bells toll, not in mourning, but in defiance. A holy war begins, not just for power, but for the soul of Ethiopia. From the cliffs above, Lalibela's warriors strike, swift, silent, fierce. The rebels are caught in the jaws of the highlands. Steel clashes, cries echo. Victory is claimed in blood and dust, but joy turns to silence. Amid the fallen lies, Lalibela's own brother, a warrior, a prince, a martyr. The mountain was won, but at the cost of his heart. In the shadow of sorrow, Emperor Lalibela speaks. Across the highlands, the call is heard. Fast and pray. Fires are extinguished. Tables remain untouched. Monks chant through the silence of night, their voices rising like incense to the heavens. A kingdom mourns and prays not for vengeance, but for peace. Out of the dust he rides, wounded in flesh, but not in purpose. The rebel prince has returned. In the eastern lowlands he finds strength not in numbers, but in belief. Around crackling fires, a new army forms, not of kings, but of the faithful. The fire of vengeance becomes the flame of destiny. High in the Ethiopian highlands, King Lalibela lifts his chisel, not for conquest, but for creation. With each strike of stone, he says, angels stood beside him, guiding his hands, whispering holy designs. From the mountain itself, sacred churches begin to rise, carved not by men alone, but by faith, fire, and the touch of the divine. In the heart of an ancient Ethiopian church, a single footprint lies carved in stone. No tool made it, no hand placed it. Believers say it's the mark of Saint Tekla Haymanot, left behind when he stood in prayer for 7 years without rest. Some come to kneel, others come to weep, but all feel it. Faith pressed deep into the rock of time. The sacred city of Wag trembles as rebel war cries echo through the highlands. Flames rise, stone crumbles, but inside the cathedral, the monks do not run. Clad in white, they stand before the altar, chanting prayers as swords draw near. One by one they fall, not in fear, but in faith. And so their blood becomes incense, rising to heaven. In the shadowed silence of an ancient church, a forgotten scroll is unearthed. Written in sacred Ge'ez, it speaks of a war between two sons of Zion. One wears the crown, the other the sword. Both claim divine right. Both claim the prophecy. And as the scroll passes from hand to hand, the land holds its breath, for the war it foretells has already begun. As war closed in, King Lalibela did not call for swords, he called for prayer. Across the highlands, monks chanted, villagers knelt, and incense rose into the sky. And then it happened. Stars fell like rain, burning trails across the heavens. Some called it a miracle, others a warning. But all knew the night had been touched by God. He stood alone on the battlefield, cross in hand, flames in his wake. Some called it a miracle, others dark sorcery. Now, before the king and priests, he awaits judgment, not of man, but of heaven. Is he a saint or a heretic? In Ethiopia's sacred court, even the angels hold their breath. In the shadows of the burning sands, the prince makes his move. Gold changes hands. Horses are saddled. From forgotten tribes rise new allies, fierce, loyal, and ready for war. Bound by blood and prophecy, they ride not just for power, but for the throne of Zion. At the edge of the highlands, two armies met beneath the gaze of heaven. The river Tekeze bore witness to steel, to fury, to the cries of the faithful. Spears shattered, blood spilled, and the water turned red with sacrifice. When silence returned, only prayer remained, echoing over the crimson current. Bound in chains, but unbroken in spirit, the monks of Zagwe faced the tormentors' wrath with songs on their lips. As whips lashed and fires burned, they sang the Psalms of David, every verse a shield, every word a weapon of faith. They died with melody and prayer, their final breath a hymn that still echoes through Ethiopia's sacred hills. High in the jagged mountains, King Lalibela disappears into silence. For 40 days, he eats nothing, speaks nothing, only prayer fills the wind. Then one night, beneath the stars, a vision blazes before him. 13 churches, carved not by men but by angels. When he returns, his eyes shine with fire. The king has become a vessel of the divine. Lalibela lays down the crown, not in defeat, but in devotion. His nephew takes the throne, a new guardian of the realm. Yet the people still look to Lalibela, not as king, but as a holy father. In monasteries and mountains, his prayers echo. The throne may change hands, but the spirit of the kingdom still walks in his footsteps. The Zagwe are gone, but their stones still speak. The Solomonic crown shines once more, born of ancient blood and prophecy. Yet in the quiet hills of Lalibela, churches carved by faith still breathe with prayer. Kings rise, empires fall, but what is carved in spirit endures forever. In the heart of the 13th century, Ethiopia witnessed a seismic shift. The Zagwe dynasty, rulers for over 3 centuries, faced growing internal dissent and waning legitimacy. Their authority, once rooted in piety and tradition, began to crumble under the weight of dynastic fatigue. Though their legacy includes the famed rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, many questioned their divine right to rule. Enter Yekuno Amlak, a noble from Bete Amhara. Backed by religious leaders and ambitious regional elites, he challenged the ruling order. His campaign gathered momentum, and in 1270, the Zagwe dynasty fell, dramatically and decisively. A new era was about to begin. Yekuno Amlak's ascent wasn't just a political victory, it was seen as a divine restoration. Claiming descent from the union of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, he declared himself the rightful heir to Ethiopia's ancient throne. This lineage wasn't simply a tale, it was a powerful tool. The clergy and the nobility rallied behind him, viewing his rule as the fulfillment of a prophecy. His coronation was a moment of revival of both monarchy and men. With his rise, Ethiopia reconnected to its sacred origins, and the Solomonic legacy was reborn. The Kebra Nagast, a 14th century manuscript, emerged as the ideological foundation of this new Solomonic dynasty. It told the story of how Menelik I, the son of Solomon and Sheba, brought the Ark of the Covenant from Jerusalem to Ethiopia. More than history, it was a declaration of divine favor. The text legitimized Solomonic rule and framed the Ethiopian monarchy as part of a sacred continuum. It became scripture, story, and state doctrine, uniting people under a shared divine past and spiritual mission. Yekuno Amlak recognized that spiritual authority was as vital as military power. He forged a strong alliance with the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. In doing so, He didn't just secure his throne, he anchored it in religious legitimacy. Churches were built, monasteries flourished, and doctrine was aligned with dynastic rule. Faith became the foundation of unity, as spiritual and political power worked in concert to shape the nation's identity and future. After Yakuno Amlak, his son Yagbeu Seyon assumed the throne. His reign was marked not by war, but by diplomacy. He reached out to the Mamluk Sultanate, advocating for the protection of Ethiopian Christians living in Islamic lands. Letters were exchanged, envoys dispatched. Ethiopia began to assert itself in international affairs as a Christian kingdom among powerful Muslim neighbors. Through faith and diplomacy, Yagbeu Seyon advanced Ethiopia's influence abroad. With Yagbeu Seyon's death, the question of succession threatened to undo his achievements. He decreed that each of his sons would rule for a year, a compromise meant to prevent civil war. Instead, it led to instability and confusion. The empire cycled through short-lived reigns, each weakening the authority of the crown. Factions formed and unity frayed. The dream of a strong, sacred monarchy seemed to slip away until the rise of a commanding new figure. That figure was Amda Seyon I, a warrior king who restored strength and order. He launched bold campaigns to expand the empire's frontiers and suppress rebellion. His leadership was resolute. Amda Seyon re-established the power of the monarchy and reclaimed the central authority that had eroded during the succession crisis. Under his rule, Ethiopia was not only defended, it was transformed into an empire of strength and vision. But Amda Seyon's legacy extended beyond conquest. His reign ignited a cultural and intellectual renaissance. Scribes, artists, and theologians found royal patronage. Chronicles detailed his victories, and illuminated manuscripts glorified both scripture and state. Churches and palaces rose, blending architecture with spiritual symbolism. This was a time of confidence, a moment when Ethiopia celebrated who it was and imagined what it could become. Ethiopia's religious landscape was both a source of pride and a diplomatic challenge. While Orthodox Christianity was the foundation of state identity, Muslim neighbors required careful negotiation. Religious coexistence at the borders, trade across faiths, and treaties with Islamic powers required tact and pragmatism. Leaders walked a tightrope, upholding Christian values while engaging diplomatically with the wider world. This delicate balance ensured Ethiopia's survival in a complex geopolitical environment. Between 1270 and 1500, the early Solomonic rulers laid the foundation of a unified Ethiopian identity. They fused spiritual heritage with imperial ambition, creating a state rooted in divine origin and earthly power. The Lion of Judah, once a biblical symbol, became Ethiopia's royal emblem. Their legacy endured not only in palaces and cathedrals, but in the national memory. Today, their echoes live on, in stone, scripture, and spirit, as the heart of Ethiopia's enduring story. The Solomonic throne, ancient, proud, and crowned with legend, watched over Ethiopia's highlands like a lion in stillness. But by 1528, a storm brewed in the eastern lowlands. Rising from the shadows of the Horn came Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi, known as the Left-Handed. With fire in his eyes and a blade sanctified for Jihad, he vowed to shatter the old order. Ottoman cannons roared at his back, and with crescent banners flying, he crossed the Awash River. His mission was clear, unrelenting: to bring Christian Ethiopia to its knees and rewrite the destiny of an empire. In 1529, on the plains of Shimbrakure, the earth shook beneath hooves as Gragan's cavalry thundered through Ethiopia's defenses. The imperial army was broken, shattered like glass beneath iron. One by one, cities crumbled into ash, sacred monasteries aflame, ancient scrolls turned to smoke, priests, guardians of centuries, cut down at the altar. Emperor Lebna Dengel, once sovereign of a proud realm, fled into the mountains. Day by day, his kingdom dissolved into shadow. The heart of Ethiopia was bleeding, and history held its breath. Lebna Dengel, with his empire in flames, reached out across continents, his plea echoing through the courts of Christian Europe. In distant Lisbon, the call was heard. The King of Portugal answered with steel and faith. In 1540, 400 Portuguese musketeers under the command of Cristóvão da Gama landed at the Red Sea port of Massawa. Their boots struck African soil like thunder. Crosses gleamed beside gunpowder. Hope had returned, but it came too late. The emperor was dead, and the soul of Ethiopia stood alone against the storm. From the shadows of exile rose Gelarbos, the young prince, son of a fallen emperor. In the mist-wrapped highlands, he rallied scattered warriors and surviving Portuguese musketeers. Together, they struck like ghosts, swift, silent, unyielding. Enemy patrols vanished in ravines, and burned-out valleys echoed with defiance. Among smoldering ruins, a whisper turned into a war cry. Ethiopia would rise again. February 1543, Ethiopia's final stand. On the blood-soaked plains of Wainadaga, thunder roared from Portuguese muskets, and Ethiopian spears glinted in the rising sun. Against overwhelming odds, they met Gragan's vast army in a storm of smoke and steel. Amid the chaos, the unthinkable happened. Imam Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi fell, struck down in battle. With his death, the Jihad crumbled, and the tide of destruction was finally broken. Victory came, but the scars ran deep. Sacred churches lay in ash, their bells silenced. The once thriving northern highlands stood hollow, reshaped by waves of Oromo migrations. Yet from the ruins, Emperor Gelarbos rose, determined to heal a broken kingdom. He rebuilt stone by stone, faith by faith. But in 1559, on the battlefield once more, he fell, sword in hand. Even so, the Solomonic line endured, bloodied but unbroken. Half a century later, amidst war, famine, and fractured faith, a new ruler rose, Emperor Susenyos. Surrounded by chaos and division, he sought a bold solution, unity through change. Turning westward, he embraced Roman Catholicism, a move both strategic and spiritual. In a grand ceremony, Jesuit Patriarch Mendes placed the crown upon his head. But as incense filled the air, rage simmered below. Across the highlands, the Orthodox clergy fumed. What one emperor saw as salvation, many saw as betrayal. Ethiopia erupted into flames. The mountains echoed with the chants of defiant monks, their voices rising like thunder. Orthodox rebels took up the cross and the sword. Jesuit churches burned as villages turned on foreign priests. Soldiers laid down their weapons or turned them against their king. Even Susenyos' own brother raised the banner of revolt. The empire fractured. Brother fought brother. Ethiopia bled, not for land or crown, but for the soul of its faith. Shattered by years of bloodshed and rebellion, Emperor Susenyos laid down the crown in 1632. In his place rose his son, Fasilides, young, resolute, and determined to restore a fractured realm. The Jesuits were cast out. Orthodoxy reclaimed its altar. And upon the highlands, a new vision took shape. Gondar, a city of castles and faith, the Camelot of Africa. From its stone towers, Ethiopia began to mend. The fires of civil war dimmed, and a wounded nation took its first steps toward renewal. Between 1500 and 1700, Ethiopia walked the edge of ruin. Jihad scorched its churches, civil war shattered its unity, foreign creeds tested its soul. Yet through fire and fracture, the Solomonic flame refused to die. Empires trembled, kings fell, but the heart of the highlands beat on. The land bled, yes, but the spirit of its people, unbroken, unyielding, eternal. In the highlands of northwestern Ethiopia, near Lake Tana, a vision was born, one that would reshape the heart of a kingdom. It was the early 17th century, and Emperor Fasilides, son of Emperor Susenyos, sought to restore order after decades of religious strife. Rejecting foreign influence and reaffirming Orthodox faith, Fasilides chose a strategic plateau surrounded by fertile lands and protective hills. There, he founded a city unlike any before, Gondar, the first permanent imperial capital in Ethiopia's long history. Stone by stone, an imperial fortress rose from the earth. Fasil Gebi, a marvel of Ethiopian architecture fused with Portuguese, Indian, and local influences. Towering battlements, domed halls, and painted ceilings became the symbol of imperial authority. Churches such as Debre Haile Selassie would soon follow, adorned with vivid frescoes that told sacred stories to the faithful. Gondar was not merely a seat of power, it was a beacon of cultural renaissance. As the sun set over the city's golden spires, Ethiopia entered a new era, one of stability, sophistication, and centralized rule. The age of Gondar had begun. In the heart of the 17th century, a storm of division clouded Ethiopia's skies. Foreign missionaries whispered in royal courts. Faith stood shaken, and sovereignty trembled under foreign tongues. But then a new emperor rose, Emperor Fasilides, crowned in 1632, not just with gold, but with resolve. His vision? To reclaim Ethiopia's soul. Like a lion reclaiming its pride, Fasilides banished the Jesuit missionaries, silencing their foreign sermons. The cross of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church was raised high once more, blazing above all towers. In a powerful gesture of religious defiance and renewal, he rekindled ties with the Patriarch of Alexandria, restoring spiritual kinship stretching back to ancient times. But his ambition did not end with faith. In 1636, amidst Ethiopia's rugged highlands, he built a city of stone and legend, Gondar. From the dust of history, the emperor summoned vision, and from that vision rose Fasil Gebi, a castle complex not of one culture, but many. Ethiopian strength, Portuguese influence, and the delicate intricacies of Indian design. Towering battlements and arched walkways whispered of imperial glory. This was no mere palace. It was a declaration, a declaration that Ethiopia would rise, not as a colony of the West, but as a cradle of sovereign culture. Under Fasilides, the empire was not only protected, it was reborn. Borders were fortified, alliances reshaped, literature flourished, brushstrokes danced across ancient manuscripts, and stone embraced artistry like never before. This was the dawn before a golden age. Fasilides did not merely rule. He restored Ethiopia's heartbeat. In the twilight of the 17th century, as shadows of uncertainty crept across kingdoms, a new light rose in Gondar. Emperor Iyasu I, Iyasu the Great, crowned in 1682 not with arrogance, but with vision, a scholar king, a warrior of wisdom, a ruler with the soul of a philosopher. Iyasu's court became a beacon of intellect and culture. The great halls of Gondar echoed not with swords, but with scripture. He commissioned the translation of sacred texts and summoned scholars to debate the mysteries of heaven and earth. Under his rule, knowledge became a weapon. But this was not an ivory tower reign. He built with stone and spirit. Ornate churches rose skyward, their walls adorned with breathtaking murals, celestial saints gazing down upon worshippers. In hidden chambers, monks labored over manuscripts, each page a tapestry of devotion and color. Gondar gleamed not just with gold, but with meaning. Iyasu the Great was not merely a patron of beauty, he was a diplomatic architect. While foreign blades clashed across distant borders, Ethiopia stood in careful peace. In 1721, the empire stirred from shadows of unrest and into the hands of a man destined to rebuild it, Emperor Bakafa. A monarch forged in the crucible of chaos, he rose not just to rule, but to restore. From the royal halls of Gondar, he brought order to a fractured realm, and with him came an alliance that would shape a dynasty. Empress Mentewab, a woman of unmatched intellect and steel resolve, she was not merely consort. She was co-ruler, advisor, queen mother, and political titan. Together, they were a royal force, their legacy written in stone. Gondar flourished once more. They commissioned grand palaces and radiant churches, each structure a monument to their unity and ambition. Towers rose, domes glistened, and sacred walls sang with frescoes of saints and emperors. But beneath the gilded splendor, storms brewed. When Bakafa died, it was Mentewab who held the empire's reins. As Empress Regent, she ruled with vision, guiding Ethiopia through treacherous waters. Yet power in Ethiopia's noble courts was never unchallenged. Her dominance sparked envy. Warlords whispered, nobles plotted, rivals stirred. The Gondarine court became a chessboard of shifting loyalties and veiled threats. It was a golden age, gilded in artistry and shadowed by political intrigue. For every masterpiece painted on chapel walls, a dagger glinted behind palace doors. Their era, a symphony of elegance and unrest, set the stage for the empire's coming trials. And as the final echoes of Mentewab's rule faded into history, one question remained. Could the empire they built withstand the ambitions they unleashed? In the heart of the Ethiopian highlands, beyond the smoke of war and the echoes of crowns, a miracle of beauty was unfolding. This was no time of conquest or rebellion. This was the Gondarine Renaissance, a golden age of the soul. From the royal city of Gondar, the empire turned its gaze inward. The sword gave way to the brush. The roar of battle was replaced by the chant of monks, the scratch of scribes, and the color-stained hands of master painters. Church walls blossomed with life. Biblical epics came alive in vibrant frescoes, Christ among lions, winged angels, saints in celestial armor, painted with Ethiopian earth and holy fire. These were not mere images. They were theology etched in pigment, a visual scripture to awe the faithful and terrify the wicked. Architects carved visions into stone, blending ancient Aksumite techniques with Portuguese arches and Mughal elegance. Towers rose beside domes, castles beside churches. Gondar was not just a capital, it was a canvas. Writers and scholars flourished in this sanctum of thought. Chronicles were inked, scripture copied by candlelight, philosophies debated beneath cathedral shadows. And in every line, every curve, every hue, the Ethiopian identity was reborn. But why now? Was this beauty a defiance of darkness, a refuge from coming storms, or a divine warning that such brilliance never lasts forever? As Ethiopia stood radiant beneath heaven's gaze, a question shimmered in the painted light. Could art alone shield an empire from the chaos to come? As the city of Gondar reached new heights of grandeur, its towers rising like prayers cast in stone, the empire beneath it hungered for order. Emperors Iyasu, Purs, and Bakafa, more than just patrons of beauty, knew the truth. Without power, glory crumbles, and so they turned their gaze inward to the veins of governance, where the lifeblood of empire must flow. A structured administration emerged. Ancient customs gave way to codified ranks. The titles of Ras, Governor, Dejazmach, Commander, and Fitarari, Vanguard Leader, were not just honors. They became instruments of control. The taxman replaced the war drum. The imperial seal replaced the tribal sword, and justice, once sung in oral tradition, was now handed down in proclamations. This was a time of iron and parchment, but order, it seemed, came at a cost. The regional lords, once free to rule their highland domains, felt the weight of Gondar's hand. What they saw was not reform, but chains. Tensions simmered. In market squares and mountain strongholds, whispers grew of betrayal, of sovereignty lost. The imperial throne had gained strength, but the unity it forged was fragile. Behind Gondar's painted walls, a new war brewed, not of blades, but of wills. The stage was set for reckoning. Despite grand reforms and gilded courts, the walls of the empire began to crack. The central crown had grown heavy and hollow. Regional lords, once bound by duty to the throne, now sought power for themselves. They raised private armies, built fortresses in the highlands, and issued decrees as if emperors themselves. The Zemene Mesafint, the era of the princes, was no longer a whisper on the wind. It loomed like a storm. Inside the walls of Gondar, power was no longer ruled. It was contested. Warlords paraded into the capital with spears raised and banners unfurled, vying not just for titles, but for control of the throne itself. Religious rivalries flared. Orthodox factions clashed with each other, each claiming divine favor. Dynasties splintered. Brothers turned on brothers, fathers against sons. And while emperors still sat on golden thrones, they no longer ruled. They reigned in name only. Their decrees whispered through the mouths of powerful nobles. Puppets, shadows draped in royal silk. The empire, once unified by faith and law, was unraveling, not at the hands of foreign foes, but from within. The age of divine monarchy was dimming, and in its place rose the blade of ambition. As Ethiopia's unity fractured, eyes from distant lands turned toward the Kingdom of the Lion. Europe watched, and Europe moved. From Lisbon to Paris, from London to Rome, ambassadors, missionaries, and merchants arrived in Gondar, bearing not just gifts, but intentions. Portugal returned, not with swords, but with scholars. France came with maps. Britain brought clocks, muskets, and silver tongues. Inside the imperial court, diplomacy became a performance. Gondarine nobles listened intently, but each heard something different. To some, these foreign envoys offered knowledge, trade, and friendship. To others, they whispered opportunity, a chance to tilt the throne in their favor. Foreign gifts dazzled the court. Telescopes, painted books, even mechanical contraptions that marked the passage of time. But beneath the silk and steel, the seeds of dependence were being sown. Some envoys aligned with rival factions. Missions became masks. Trade became leverage. Foreign gold funded local ambitions, and the court became a chessboard where not all the players were Ethiopian. The empire, proud and ancient, walked a razor's edge, eager for new knowledge, but wary of new masters. And while emperors and envoys toasted beneath golden chandeliers outside the palace walls, the country drifted further from unity. The age of foreign entanglements had begun, not with armies, but with influence. By the dawn of the 19th century, the mighty voice of Gondar had grown faint. The once proud capital, cradle of emperors and holy rites, stood noble but isolated. Its crown still gleamed, but its grasp was slipping. The center could no longer hold. Across the highlands, regional lords, Ras, Dejazmachs, Fitararis, rose not in service to the emperor, but in challenge. Each governed his province as a king in all but name. Taxation, justice, even armies were now wielded by men far from Gondar's gaze. In the royal court, intrigue festered. Noble houses formed bitter factions. Court politics, once subtle games of wit, turned into dangerous gambits of betrayal. Even emperors were chosen not by divine lineage, but by the will or whim of powerful warlords. Gondar still held its ceremonies, but they were hollow echoes of former glory. The city became a shrine to the past, a place where priests still chanted and towers still stood, even as the empire crumbled around it. This was the twilight of centralized rule. The age of imperial unity gave way to an age of rival princes and fractured allegiances. The empire was no longer one, it was many, and in that fragmentation, a storm was gathering. The Zemene Mesafint, the era of the princes, had begun. The zenith of Gondar's power gave way to a slow and steady unraveling. By the mid-19th century, internal strife and mounting external threats eroded the pillars of central authority. Warlords rose from the shadows, carving out their own fiefdoms as the once majestic capital slipped into neglect. The unity that had defined the Gondarine Empire splintered, yet Gondar's legacy stood firm, etched into stone, scripture, and spirit. How? Its soaring castles, sacred art, and enduring role as the spiritual heart of Ethiopian orthodoxy continued to inspire. Though Gondar faded from political prominence, it endures as a powerful emblem of Ethiopian resilience, culture, and unwavering faith. Gondar still held its ceremonies, but they were hollow echoes of former glory. The city became a shrine to the past, a place where priests still chanted and towers still stood, even as the empire crumbled around it. This was the twilight of centralized rule. The age of imperial unity gave way to an age of rival princes and fractured allegiances. The empire was no longer one, it was many. And in that fragmentation, a storm was gathering, the Zemene Mesafint, the era of the princes. In the year 1769, the ancient heart of Ethiopia began to beat out of rhythm. The Solomonic crown, once a symbol of divine order, now sat crooked, its luster dulled by blood and betrayal. Emperors still ruled from their thrones in Gondar, but their scepters carried no weight. Behind velvet curtains, Ras Mikael Sehul made his move, a warlord in title, a king in all but name. In one swift stroke, he murdered Emperor Ioas I, staining the palace with a message. The age of emperors was over. The Zemene Mesafint, the era of princes, had begun. Power fractured like broken glass. Regional lords rose from the shadows, each carving out their domain. Ras of Tigray, lords of Shoa, Wollo, Bagemder, all armed, all ambitious. In the highlands, smoke curled above burned villages. Armies marched not in unity, but against each other. Alliances were made with gold and broken with blades. Emperors were crowned and discarded like garments. Some ruled mere months, others never left their prison palaces. They were shadows of a royal past, figureheads under the thumbs of Ras, who feasted while peasants starved. Ethiopia did not fall, it splintered, and in every darkened corner, one question echoed: who will restore the crown, and at what cost? He entered the royal court not as a servant, but as a storm. Ras Mikael Sehul, Lord of Tigray, master of intrigue. In a world where emperors knelt to warlords, Mikael stood taller than them all. With words like daggers and armies like shadows, he seized power, not by birthright, but by cold ambition. In 1769, he struck with unspeakable audacity, murdering Emperor Ioas I. Within the very walls of the palace, he installed a puppet emperor and watched the empire bow. Was he a savior, ending a weak ruler's chaos, or a tyrant who traded kings like coins? Under Mikael's rule, Gondar became a stage of whispers and knives. Nobles feared his gaze, generals pledged loyalty with trembling hands, but power, like fire, consumes all who touch it too long. Soon, the lords who once feared Mikael began to unite. His enemies circled like wolves, ambushes, betrayals, retreats, and then silence. Mikael's influence burned out like a dying candle. The man who crowned emperors was now a footnote in their rise and fall. Yet his legacy lived on. He opened the gates to a new age where Ras ruled like emperors and emperors died forgotten. Mikael asked no permission. He rewrote the rules, but his rise left behind a chilling question. If a Ras could command the crown, who else might claim the throne? After Ras Mikael Sehul's fall, there was no peace. Instead, chaos spread like wildfire. Ethiopia shattered into a dozen kingdoms in all but name: Wollo, Gojam, Bagemder, Tigray, Shoa. Each ruled by a Ras, each drunk on power. The Solomonic Emperor, a figurehead locked in Gondar's fading halls, wearing a crown but wielding no sword. Across the highlands, warlords turned the land into a chessboard of ambition. 1 month, they were allies. The next, sworn enemies. Brother against brother, church against church. Fortresses rose atop misty peaks. Cannons echoed through sacred valleys, and ancient monasteries became battlegrounds. Even religion bent to politics. Priests anointed warlords as chosen saviors. The Ark of the Covenant was paraded to gain divine favor, and yet no side could conquer all. Peace was always promised, but never delivered. Every treaty was a trap, every alliance a lie. Villages burned for loyalties they never chose. Fields lay barren, roads crumbled. Ethiopia, the once mighty kingdom, was bleeding. But within the ashes, hope stirred. In the shadows of fractured rule, whispers began to grow. Where is the true emperor? When will the lion rise again? From the mountains, a figure would soon rise to unite them. But first, there would be more blood. Gondar, the once shining capital of emperors, now stood as a ghost of itself. Its grand castles, carved from stone and glory, echoed with silence. Inside sat an emperor, but not a ruler, a puppet draped in gold. His word meant nothing. His court, a theater of shadows. Outside those walls, real power shifted with the wind, passed from Ras to Ras, sword to sword. One day, Ras Ali ruled from Debre Tabor. The next, Ras Wube from Tigray marched on the north. Then came Dejazmach Kasa, a name barely whispered, yet destined to shake the world. The people watched, waited, suffered. Every region fought for dominance. Every noble saw himself a king. And the clergy? Divided. Some priests clung to ancient rites. Others bent the cross toward power. Gondar wept. Once the city of saints and scribes, now a pawn in a war of egos. Schools closed. Churches burned. Scrolls were lost to fire, to greed, to time. Yet even in ruin, Ethiopia remembered. The stories of Solomon still echoed in broken halls. The line was not broken, only dormant. And while the nobles warred, far from Gondar's crumbling walls, a warrior was rising, shaped by battle, scarred by betrayal. Not born in the palace, but destined for the throne. Who was he? And could he restore the lion's roar? In the chaos of shattered crowns and broken oaths, a lone lion stirred in the north. His name? Kasa Haile. Not born of nobility, not raised in luxury. He came from hardship, from betrayal, famine, and exile. His youth was marked by the sound of muskets and the scent of scorched earth. He watched the races squabble over scraps of empire, watched the people bleed, starve, fade, and he swore, "I will not die a servant to tyrants. I will not kneel to chaos." Kasa gathered followers, farmers, outlaws, patriots. He didn't rule, he inspired. With every victory, his legend grew. Dejazmach Kasa, they called him now. The common man's general, the people's sword. Ras Ali, the power in Gondar, saw him as a nuisance. But that nuisance became a storm. In 1853, at the Battle of Ashal, Kasa faced Ras Ali's army, outnumbered, surrounded, but Kasa fought like a lion cornered. When the smoke cleared, Ras Ali fled, and the empire trembled. Was this the end of Zemene Mesafint, or the birth of something darker? In the ruins of a shattered kingdom, one man now stood above all, but with power came a heavier crown, and the blood he'd spilled would soon pale to the fire he would unleash. In 1855, beneath the ancient sky of Deraske Mariam, a man knelt not as a warlord, but as a king reborn. Kasa Haile became Emperor Tewodros II, a name chosen not by birth, but by fire. He claimed descent from Solomon himself. But Tewodros did not inherit a throne. He seized it with bloodied hands and a blazing vision. Ethiopia would rise again, united, strong, defiant. No more puppet emperors, no more Ras tyranny. The age of princes was over. The lion wore the crown now. He built roads. He crafted cannon. He summoned foreign craftsmen. He dreamed of a modern Ethiopia. But dreams have shadows. Tewodros' hand grew heavier, his justice absolute. Those who opposed him, nobles, monks, even his own men, faced prison or worse. The emperor who rose from the people now ruled them with an iron will. Did power change the man? Or did the crown simply reveal the storm within? Across the provinces, the old power stirred again. The age of princes was not dead. It had only bled. Tewodros would face not only rebels, but foreign empires. By 1868, the dream of Emperor Tewodros II stood on a knife's edge. His enemies had not only gathered within, but now came from across oceans. He had written to Queen Victoria seeking alliance, seeking respect. But silence answered him. Enraged, he imprisoned British diplomats, a desperate act or a defiant warning to the world. England did not stay silent. They sent an army, 13,000 troops across deserts and mountains with elephants, artillery, engineers. A full-scale invasion to free a few men and break an emperor. Tewodros fortified his mountain stronghold, Magdala. There, atop the mist-covered cliffs, he waited for battle or fate. The British ascended, and the mountain thundered with gunfire. The walls fell, the palace burned, but they would not take him. Tewodros, ever the lion, turned his pistol inward. A single shot and silence. He died by his own hand, not theirs. In that act, he denied his enemies their triumph and sealed his place in Ethiopian legend. But what they took was treasure, memory, history. The British looted Magdala, sacred books, crowns, relics carried away like spoils. Ethiopia had lost a king, but it had gained something greater, the fire of unity. The age of princes was finished. A new age would rise, but at what cost? Tewodros was gone, but his death did not bring peace. The lion had fallen, and in the vacuum, the jackals crept back in. The highlands fractured once more. Ambition stirred in every valley. Ras Kasai in Tigray, Ras Menelik in Shewa. Kings in all but name, all claiming the throne, left cold atop Magdala. The empire was no longer ruled by law, but by rifles, oaths, and betrayal. Alliances were made, then broken. 1 month, allies. The next, enemies. Warlords signed pacts in the morning and spilled blood by nightfall. In the markets of Gondar, whispers returned, "When will the emperor return?" But emperors were now ghosts. The churches remained, yes, but priests prayed under fire. Bandits roamed roads once sacred. Ancient manuscripts stolen, monasteries burned. Ethiopia's soul bled slowly, not from conquest, but from within. Men rose and fell, each chasing the crown, but none with the power to unite the broken realm. Yet, in the far north, one man gathered steel and silence, a former ally of Tewodros, hardened by war and patient. Would he be the one, or just another shadow in the long night? The era of princes dragged on, but in the distance, thunder stirred once more. In the aftermath of Emperor Tewodros II's death at Magdala, Ethiopia stood fractured, its throne vacant, its nobles divided, and its enemies watching. But in the north, from the highlands of Tigray, rose a new figure, Ras Kasa Mercha, a reserved but capable general who, in 1872, ascended the throne as Emperor Johannes IV. Johannes was not a man of pomp. He was a man of faith. A devout follower of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, he believed that unity could only be forged through spiritual strength and military resolve. His reign would be defined by defense of his people, of his church, and of a nation besieged. In 1875, Egyptian forces backed by Britain marched into Ethiopian territory. But at the Battle of Gundet, Johannes sprang a brilliant ambush in the mountain passes. The invaders were annihilated. A year later, at Gura, the Egyptians returned in greater numbers, yet Johannes crushed them again, defying modern weaponry with strategy and valor. Internally, he sought to solidify power through religious uniformity. He demanded that all Muslims and Catholics in his realm convert to orthodoxy, a decree that brought both loyalty and resentment. To Johannes, faith was not just personal, it was political and essential for national survival. But a final threat loomed. In 1889, the Mahdist forces from Sudan invaded. Johannes led his army to Metema, carrying the sacred Tabat, the symbol of divine protection. In the heat of battle, he was struck by a bullet. Refusing to retreat, he fought on until his death. Johannes IV died a warrior king, his body lost, his head paraded by enemies, but his legacy sealed in blood and devotion. Though he did not live to see a united Ethiopia, he bought it time, holding the line so that others, like Menelik II, could carry the dream forward.
From the highlands of Shewa rose another giant, Menelik II, the lion-hearted emperor who would shake the world. He dreamed not just of unity, but of prestige. Ethiopia would modernize with railroads, telegraphs, imported weapons. But as Menelik built, another empire crept closer. Italy. At first, diplomacy. A treaty, the Treaty of Wuchale. Two versions, one in Italian, one in Amharic. But they did not say the same thing. In Amharic, Menelik agrees to friendship. In Italian, Ethiopia becomes a protectorate. A lie disguised as paper. Menelik refused, and the Empire of Italy prepared for war. They believed it would be easy, a colonial conquest like all the rest. But Ethiopia was not like the rest. In 1896, on the plains of Adwa, Menelik rallied over 100,000 warriors. Churches tolled their bells, nobles arrived from every province. At dawn, spears met rifles. And history changed forever. The Italians were crushed. An African empire had defeated a European power in a pitched battle. For a moment, the world paused and watched. And Menelik, crowned in glory, stood as the emperor who rewrote the fate of a continent. After Adwa, Ethiopia basked in pride. But the storm was not over. Menelik grew old. Regions clashed. Intrigue brewed in the court like dark incense. And from that haze emerged a boy, Liege Tafari Makonnen. Sharp-eyed, cautious, dignified. Born of nobility, descendant of King Haile Selassie of Shewa. He watched the empire from the shadows, learning, listening. While others paraded swords, Tafari wielded ideas. He read Western books, learned languages, spoke with emissaries. Modernity whispered to him. When Menelik died, the throne passed hands like a candle in a storm to Empress Zuditu, a monarch of tradition. Tafari became her regent. But power was not given, it was taken, slowly, deliberately. Railways stretched, schools opened, newspapers began to print, and then a crown. In 1930, Tafari was crowned Emperor Haile Selassie I, King of Kings, elect of God. His coronation dazzled the world. Journalists from Europe and America watched, mouths agape. He spoke of unity, of law, of the rights of man. But in the far north, in Italy, Mussolini listened not in awe, but in envy. A lion had risen, and another beast was stirring. As Haile Selassie's star rose, so too did the envy of empires. In the marble halls of Rome, Benito Mussolini dreamed of conquest. He longed for a second Roman Empire, and Ethiopia, uncolonized, proud, stood in his way. The world applauded Haile Selassie's reforms, but few truly listened when he warned, "A storm is coming." In secret, Italy stockpiled weapons, modern tanks, poison gas, thousands of troops, while Ethiopia's warriors still bore spears and rifles from decades past. Along the border of Eritrea, tension smoldered, skirmishes flared. Then the Wall incident, a remote oasis, Ethiopian patrols, Italian soldiers. Shots fired, blood spilled on the sand. Italy claimed provocation. The League of Nations issued words, not action. Haile Selassie stood before the world calm, regal, and pleaded for justice. "It is us today. It will be you tomorrow." But the world turned away. In 1935, Mussolini gave the order. The skies over Tigray darkened with warplanes. The sound of engines drowned out the hymns of the highlands. Ethiopia, once victorious at ADWA, would now face a mechanized monster. The last African empire was under siege. The sky rained death. Italian bombers screamed across the highlands, dropping poison and fire. Villages burned, churches crumbled, and yet Ethiopia did not kneel. From the valleys of Gondar to the mountains of Timbian, warriors rose. Some were nobles, others were farmers, but all were patriots. They fought with courage, but faced tanks, aircraft, mustard gas. Emperor Haile Selassie, knowing he could not win a conventional war, made a heart-wrenching decision. He left his kingdom to save it. Into exile he went not in defeat, but with purpose. In Geneva, he stood before the League of Nations, a solitary lion in a den of cowards. "You turned your backs on justice," he thundered. "Today it is us. Tomorrow it will be you." His words echoed through history, but the world remained silent. Ethiopia was declared an Italian colony. Fascist flags flew over Addis Ababa. But in the shadows, the Arbonok, the patriots, rose. Guerrilla fighters struck from caves, forests, and hilltops. They were outgunned, outnumbered, but never outwilled. And far away, in exile, Haile Selassie waited, waiting for a crack in the empire's armor, waiting for the lion's return. World War II changed the fate of nations, and Ethiopia's hour had come. In exile, Haile Selassie waited. From a quiet room in England, surrounded by maps and letters from his scattered patriots, the emperor plotted his return. The wounds of invasion had not healed, but the fire of resistance still burned. In the highlands, the Arbegnok Ethiopia's patriot Shad never surrendered. Waging guerrilla war from the mountains, they defied occupation with ancient rifles and unbreakable spirit. And across the desert, a new alliance formed. British forces, now locked in war with Mussolini's Italy, joined hands with the exiled emperor. Together, they prepared to strike. In 1941, the Lion of Judah roared again. From the borderlands of Sudan to the gates of Addis Ababa, the tide turned. Ethiopian patriots and British troops moved as one. Italian forces crumbled, retreating as the empire they tried to claim collapsed around them. And then triumph. Haile Selassie returned to his capital, not as a fugitive, but as a liberator. Crowds flooded the streets, flags waved, bells rang. After 5 long years, the emperor rode through a free Addis Ababa once more. But beneath the celebration lay scars villages burned, families broken, dreams deferred. The trauma of occupation lingered like smoke over the highlands. Reclaiming the throne was only the beginning. The emperor resumed his rule. Yet the world had changed, and so had Ethiopia. A crossroads had been reached. The question was no longer survival, but transformation. Could this ancient kingdom modernize fast enough? Could it educate, rebuild, and rise in a post-war world? The war was over, but a new struggle had begun, the struggle to shape Ethiopia's future. The 1950s and 60s, the empire stood tall, but trembled beneath its weight. Haile Selassie, now a statesman of global stature, brought Ethiopia to the world stage. He addressed the United Nations with dignity and vision. He championed African unity, hosting leaders from across the continent. To many abroad, Ethiopia looked like a rising empire, independent, sovereign, and proud. At home, the emperor pressed forward with reforms. Schools were built in rural villages. Hospitals rose from dusty plains. A new generation filled classrooms, learning to dream beyond the horizon. But progress cast long shadows. In the countryside, women still walked miles for water. Fields lay dry and hunger lingered. The nobility feasted in the capital while peasants toiled in silence. In Addis Ababa's lecture halls, a restless youth stirred. They studied the world and began to question their own justice, land, voice. Their demands grew louder, bolder, unstoppable. Journalists lit candles in the dark, typing stories no one dared print. Farmers murmured in frustration. The old ways were no longer enough. Even as modern cars roared through city streets, donkey carts still rolled beside them. The empire straddled two worlds past and future uncertain of which it truly belonged to. Haile Selassie remained the symbol of unity, but unity was fraying. Beneath the pageantry, tension brewed. And high in the mountains, a lone figure watched the horizon not with triumph, but with unease. The empire had survived invasion. It had reclaimed its throne. But now, it faced something even more dangerous. Change? By the early 1970s, the shadows grew long across the land. In the palace, Haile Selassie sat in silence, staring through the window of a changing world. Once hailed as a liberator, a unifier, a symbol of pride now, questions echoed louder than applause. To the north, famine carved lines into the faces of farmers. Cracked earth replaced once fertile fields. In the cities, students marched with banners held high. Justice, reform. Their voices were peaceful, but their meaning thundered. Mothers rationed food in flickering candlelight. Nobles, once secure in their privilege, watched unrest unfold on television screens, their faces marked by uncertainty. Ethiopia was waking up and the old world was slipping away. The emperor, now in his final years, turned to faith. In the sacred stillness of the cathedral, incense rising like memory, he prayed for his people, for peace, for time. But time does not wait. In the dead of night, a hand scrawled words across a wall. Change is coming. And it was. The empire had stood for decades against colonizers, against time itself. But now, it trembled from within. The storm had arrived. Haile Selassie's reign was nearing its end. His crown, once the pride of a continent, could no longer hold back the tide. And yet, Ethiopia did not end. Her rivers still ran. Her mountains still stood. Her churches still whispered ancient hymns. And her youth bold, scarred, unbroken, looked toward the rising sun. The last crown would fall, but the story of Ethiopia was only just beginning.